What is up, guys? So every new Arrowverse season gives us some new heroes and villains. In this video, I wanted to go over the 5 best new villains from the new Arrowverse seasons, those seasons being Arrow Season 7, The Flash Season 5, Supergirl Season 4, and Legends of Tomorrow Season 4. One thing you have to keep in mind for this video is that I personally have been pretty disappointed by the new villains this year so far, so I don't necessarily love all the characters on this list. I would say the only character on this list, which is number 1, is a really great villain, and the others are good villains, but I am, again, very disappointed by the new villains this season, and you can see that on this list. But for now, let's go over the 5 best new villains from the new seasons so far. Number 5 is Ben Lockwood, aka Agent Liberty. So despite the fact that I don't really love the concept of Supergirl Season 4, which is basically also the concept of the villain, which is, although not actual real life, but it is very political, and it mirrors real-life politics about illegal aliens as opposed to outer space aliens on Supergirl. Despite this, I still find myself generally liking Agent Liberty as a character and as a villain. I do think that his motivation was fleshed out rather well in the season, and he definitely was developed well as well. The actor is also great in the role. He definitely brings some certain charisma to the role that really complements the character. I have some problems with the season in general, and those problems affect the character, which is, like I said, he's too political. Despite these problems, Agent Liberty somehow remained a character I really enjoy seeing in Supergirl Season 4, landing him at number 5 on the list. Number 4 is Stanley Dover, who will probably become the Star City Slayer in the second half of Season 7, as that is his supervillain name in the comics. For now, he's just Stanley Dover, and was really just a villain in one episode, which is episode 7. Despite this, he makes the list, mostly because of the pretty insanely thought out twist they pulled off during the first 7 episodes of the season, because in episodes 1 through 6, right until the end of episode 6, he was portrayed as a not very menacing, pretty small guy who was wrongfully accused and imprisoned of a crime he seemingly didn't commit, and they pulled this off by calling him Stanley, never really calling him Stanley Dover. They didn't really confirm his name until episode 7, and they had a casting call with a guy named Dover, who was teased as this really large guy who's not very smart. That didn't really fit the character, so that just I didn't really equate the two. I thought that Stanley Dover would be another character, or they would use the Star City Slayer in a different way with the Dover they were casting. So I do think this twist was very well thought out if they wanted to trick audiences that way, because in episode 6, right at the end, it was hinted to us that Stanley was maybe not as innocent as he let on, and Oliver Queen suspected that he, again, might not be as innocent as he let on, and they went all in on that in episode 7, where he went full psychopathic Star City Slayer, or at least he will become that name. The twist was insane and definitely unexpected, also executed incredibly well in the season, and the twist was also handled incredibly well with the character himself, as when it was all revealed, he didn't really change his personality or the way he acted, because that's what he was like the entire time. He just stayed the way he was like, but also he was a psychopath. I do give credit to the writers and the actor there for avoiding the cliche of a character being revealed as a villain and then changing their entire personality. And while this twist is the main reason he's on the list, the actual villain was great in episode 7 as well, so he definitely has the potential to be an incredible villain in the second half of Season 7, where he gets more than one episode. Number 3 is Amazo. So a big reason Amazo's on this list is his Justice League significance, because during the first part of Elseworlds, during that fight between what was essentially the Justice League in this crossover and Amazo, I really never felt like the Justice League was in the Arrowverse this much, which is because of a couple reasons. One, Superman was included. Superman just being there makes it feel more like the Justice League, and characters who make it feel like less like a Justice League, like Heatwave, Killer Frost, or Zari, because they're villains in the comics, were not included, but also because they were fighting Amazo. You probably know Amazo from the Justice League or Justice League Unlimited TV shows, and yeah, he's definitely not nearly as good in the crossover as he is there, but that's just because in that TV show, he was easily the best version of the character ever, including comic books, from his characteristic, his backstory, his motivation, and his design, and although he's not as good here in the crossover, he is decent, and I think he's equal or even a little bit better to his comic book version, as he, just like the comic book version, doesn't have much of a personality. He's just an android who can copy powers. Actually, he's not really an android, he's just a robot because he doesn't really look like a human, but that's one thing. I didn't really like the design, but that's still better than the comic book design. I mean, look at this design. It looks so stupid. I think the CGI for Amazo here is really great. His power set, which is obviously copying other superpowers, was handled pretty well, as he copied Killer Frost, the Flash, and Superman/Supergirl's powers. And he did use those powers quite a lot. He did copy Elongated Man's powers as well, and I don't think he really used those very much. Maybe a little bit, but not very much. But that's not here or there. I also love the fact that they included the symbols on the chest, which doesn't really make any sense. That doesn't, like in continuity, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but I love that they included it nonetheless. So in general, Amazo is a pretty good villain, but obviously the main reason he's on this list is because during the fight with what is essentially the Justice League, they felt like the Justice League partially because they were fighting a very well executed, famous Justice League villain. Number 2 is Orland Dwyer, aka Cicada. So I do have to admit, Cicada has definitely not been my favorite main villain so far this season, or at least like compared to the rest of the Arrowverse in all of the seasons. I think the costume is ridiculously boring, the actor isn't really amazing, and his motivation is entirely uncut by the fact that it means he needs to kill himself at the end, because he no longer feels like he wants to get revenge. It feels like he's angry at the world and he's kind of suicidal. On top of all this, they changed his name from the comics, which I don't understand why they needed to do that. Despite all these problems, he's really one of the only villains this season who has had any development, and that's probably because only 2 of the shows, Supergirl and The Flash, have explored a new main villain. Legends of Tomorrow has only really introduced its main villain in the last episode in one scene, and on Arrow they're using a previous main villain who is not a new character in this season. So it's only Cicada and Agent Liberty, and in my opinion, Cicada is a lot better than Agent Liberty, at least in execution. I think Cicada is, as a character, well developed, and as a threat, well developed in the season, and although his motivation is flawed, it definitely was very well developed all the way up to episode 8, where in my opinion it was undercut, and his niece/daughter definitely makes him a pretty sympathetic villain in this season. I would also say that his lightning dagger, which is really the main thing that he was teased as before the season started, is pretty awesome. Its powers and its use most of the time is great. I've said this before, but Cicada, because of his lightning dagger, really feels like a very watered down, powered down, evil version of Thor with virtually the same powers. I mean, just think about it. He has a lightning dagger, which he can control, like Mjolnir, or Stormbreaker, which is his new Mjolnir, the axe, but also he can shoot lightning, he can fly with it, and he has super strength, so all the powers of Thor, but a lot less powered, and also he could get rid of superpowers, which is definitely really awesome. So while Cicada, I don't love him as a character, I don't love him as a villain, he is the second best villain this season, or the second best new villain this season in the Arrowverse. Before we get to number 1, let's go over some honorable mentions. Those honorable mentions being Jarrett Parker from Arrow Season 7, who I thought was a very unexpected great villain. Manchester Black, who I don't know if I would call a villain, but the season of Supergirl definitely wants you to call him one, so I guess there's that, and in that season he was pretty great. Ragdoll, who was very creepy, he didn't make the list because he wasn't very developed, and he was only really in one episode, and he wasn't very exciting to be there. He was just pretty creepy, although he, out of all the honorable mentions, would probably be right next to the list. And then John Deegan, who was pretty good as the main villain of Elseworlds, but I am very disappointed that he wasn't good enough to make the list. So speaking of Elseworlds, let's move on to number 1. So, like I said, number 1 is the only villain in this list who I think is an actual great villain, and that is ironic because he maybe not actually be considered a villain, which is Mar-Novu, aka the Monitor. So whether or not the Monitor is truly a villain, which I don't 100% know that he is not really in question here, because while he isn't technically a villain because his intent is to prepare our heroes for an actual villain in what is probably the Anti-Monitor, he definitely was, in my opinion, an antagonist as the primary source of conflict in Elseworlds, and as that main antagonist, he was pretty great. I think that the actor was an incredible casting choice for the role, as really an amalgamation of a couple different Monitors from the comics, those characters being the Crisis version, the Mandrak the Monitor version, and the Super Judge version. He takes the look of the Nixutan version, which is a super judge, and the name of Dax Novu, his name is Mar Novu, as well as the costume and role and ridges on his head from the Monitor from Crisis on Infinite Earths. And I think that as a amalgamation of those characters, the casting was a great choice. I also think that his costume is pretty incredible, and his role in the universe, as well as his role in the multiverse, is just an incredible inclusion to the Arrowverse. He was one of the best parts of Elseworlds because he just brought so much. In terms of whether or not he's an actual villain, I think that if you do consider him to be not a villain, then he's just a pretty great character, starting everything that happened in Elseworlds, leading up to everything that's going to happen in Crisis. If you do consider him a villain, then I would argue he's comparable to Thanos. They both are very imposing, menacing beings with seemingly infinite power who are causing conflict to the heroes because of something that they are trying to accomplish, which will kill a lot of people. In the Monitor's sake, he did kill a bunch of universes or Earths, and for Thanos, he destroyed half the universe, or he killed half of the life in the universe, but in the end, it would save a lot more. For the Monitor, he's trying to prepare the multiverse for the Anti-Monitor, most likely. In Thanos, he's trying to save the universe from killing itself and not really having any food left. So I think that these two characters are comparable, and while the Monitor is nowhere near as good a villain or an antagonist as Thanos, I do think that he's comparable to Thanos, and I do think he is pretty great, just like Thanos. So if you do consider Thanos a villain, then a Monitor should be considered one as well. So anyway, let me know your list in the comments down below, and if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.